My husband grounded my daughter for 2 weeks over a B-, watched his son fail 3 classes, then asked for ice cream. So I sat down at dinner, looked him dead in the eyes, and reminded him whose name was on the deed. The report card was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from work. 5 A's, 1 B-. Kevin was already at the table with it in his hand, holding it like evidence at a trial. Zoe was standing in the doorway to the hall, still wearing her backpack, still in her coat, watching him with that look she'd perfected over the last 4 years. Quiet, braced, already ready for whatever verdict was coming. He looked up at me when I walked in and held the paper out like I needed to see it too. "This isn't acceptable," he said. I set my keys down. I took my coat off. I looked at the report card. 5 A's, 1 B-, in Advanced Honors English, a class she'd tested into at the start of 6th grade. A class where the average was a C+ and she was pulling a B- and still somehow being treated like she'd committed a crime. "She worked hard this semester," I said. "Not hard enough," Kevin said. He put the report card back on the counter, very deliberately, and turned to Zoe. 2 weeks, no phone, no friends, no TV. You use that time to figure out how to get that grade back up." Zoe didn't argue. She never argued with him. She just nodded and walked down the hall to her room, and I stood there in my kitchen listening to her door close softly. And I thought about the report card sitting on that same counter exactly 7 days earlier. Marcus's report card, 3 F's, English, history, algebra, not a B- in an honors class, not a 87 in a course that challenged her, 3 complete failures, 3 classes where he'd stopped showing up to do the work entirely, according to the progress reports the school had been sending since October. Kevin looked at that report card, exhaled through his nose like someone had handed him a parking ticket, and said, "Try harder next time, bud." Then he took Marcus out for ice cream. I'm not exaggerating. I watched it happen from the kitchen window. Kevin backing his truck out of the driveway, Marcus in the passenger seat, both of them gone for an hour. And when they came back, Marcus had a cup of mint chip and Kevin had a story about running into someone from work, and the report card was never mentioned again that night. I stood at that window for a long time. I didn't say anything. I'm good at waiting. I'm very good at knowing when the right moment is and when it isn't. And that evening, with Zoe already upstairs doing homework she didn't have due, just to occupy herself, just to stay out of the way, was not the right moment. But something shifted in me. Something that had been bending for years finally went past its limit. I could feel it. I just didn't let it show yet. I need to back up because the context matters. I'm 38 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom house in Crestwood, a suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. My name is on the deed. Only my name. I'll come back to that. I work in healthcare administration, managing billing and compliance for a mid-size orthopedic group. I've been at that job for 11 years. I make good money. Not extravagant money, but solid, reliable. We don't have to check the account before grocery shopping money. My daughter Zoe is 12. She's been 12 since September. She is, objectively, one of the most internally motivated kids I've ever been around. And I'm her mother. So take that with whatever grain of salt you need. But her teachers have said the same thing consistently since 2nd grade. She cares. She works. She doesn't need to be told twice about anything. She wakes up early on her own because she likes to review her notes before school. That's just who she is. Her father, my ex-husband Daniel, has been out of the picture since Zoe was 4. He moved across the country, started a new family, and has made fitful, inconsistent contact ever since. A birthday card some years, a missed call most years, a handful of visits that Zoe stopped getting her hopes up for around age 8. That history matters because it shaped her. Zoe grew up learning that the adults in her life might disappear, that security wasn't guaranteed, and so she compensated by being exceptional, by being undeniable, by making herself impossible to overlook. I met Kevin 3 years after Daniel left. I was 31. Kevin was 34. He had a son named Marcus from a previous relationship. Marcus was 5 at the time, same age Zoe was. Kevin was charming in exactly the way divorced single fathers can be charming when they're trying. Attentive, present, funny, demonstrably good with his kid. I watched him with Marcus for months before I let myself trust anything, and what I saw looked real. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged. We got married when the kids were 7. I was careful. I was deliberate. I talked to Zoe about it more than once. Real conversations, not briefings, where I asked her how she felt and actually listened to the answer. She liked Marcus. She liked Kevin well enough. She was cautiously optimistic in the way 7-year-olds can be when they still believe things might turn out okay. The house was mine. I'd bought it 4 years before Kevin and I met, when Zoe was 18 months old, and I'd decided I was going to build something stable for us regardless of what Daniel did or didn't do. The mortgage was mine. The down payment came from my savings and a small amount from my mother. Kevin moved in when we got married, and we had a long conversation about finances where I was very clear that I wasn't looking to combine everything overnight. He said he understood. He said he respected it. He said he didn't need to have his name on everything to feel like it was his home. I believed him. That was my blind spot. One of them, anyway. The disparity between how Kevin treated the 2 kids didn't start as something obvious. It never does. It started as the kind of thing you talk yourself out of noticing. Marcus got an extra helping of patience, maybe. Marcus got the softer voice when he was upset. Kevin spent an extra 20 minutes on Marcus's bedtime when the kids were small, reading longer, playing one more game. I told myself it was adjustment. I told myself blended families take time, and Kevin was being careful not to overstep with Zoe, not to push too hard into her life when she might not want it. But Zoe did want it. She wanted a father figure. her. She was 7 and she wanted to be claimed, and Kevin never quite claimed her. He was pleasant. He was civil. He never said anything cruel, not in those early years. He just maintained a consistent, careful distance that Zoe eventually stopped trying to close. The incident I come back to most, the one that I think was the real signal I should have read more clearly, happened when Zoe was 9 and Marcus was 9, third grade for both of them. They were in different classes but the same school, and there was a science fair in February. Both kids entered. Zoe made a project about water filtration. She'd built a working filter out of sand and gravel and charcoal, and actually ran tap water through it and tested the output. Marcus made a poster about volcanoes. The poster was fine, standard. Kevin had clearly helped with the lettering. Zoe won second place. She got a blue ribbon with a silver center, and the teacher wrote "exceptionally rigorous methodology" in her comments. Marcus didn't place. Kevin congratulated Marcus on effort. He told him second place was just as good as first, which was confusing because Marcus hadn't come in second. He bought Marcus a new video game that weekend. He looked at Zoe's second place ribbon and said, "That's great, honey. Why didn't you get first?" Zoe was 9. She looked at her ribbon and then looked at Kevin and said, "I don't know." And Kevin nodded and walked away. I should have said something that day. I didn't. I told myself it was thoughtlessness, not malice. I told myself Kevin was a good man having a complicated moment. That's how 6 years passed. The Sunday dinner happened 8 days after Kevin grounded Zoe for the B-. Zoe had served her 2 weeks. She was midway through, technically, doing everything she was supposed to. Coming home, doing homework, eating dinner, going to her room. No complaints, no door slamming, just quiet compliance that broke my heart every single time I watched it. Marcus, meanwhile, was having a normal week. He had basketball practice 3 nights. Kevin drove him. Kevin sat in the bleachers. Kevin came home talking about box scores and layup drills and whether the coach was using Marcus the right way. The report card with 3 Fs hadn't come up since the night of the ice cream. I'd spent those 8 days doing something very specific. I have a home office, and every evening after Zoe went to bed, I went in there and I opened a document I'd actually started 2 years earlier. Just notes, just observations, and I added to it. I pulled up old text messages. I went through Zoe's old report cards and cross-referenced them with the notes I'd taken about Marcus's grades during the same grading periods. I printed things out. I organized by date, 3 pages, front and back, handwritten, with typed exhibit pages behind them. Every incident dated, every dollar amount noted, every double standard documented. I wasn't planning the dinner confrontation at that point. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't plotting a move. I was just building a record, the way someone does when they've finally admitted to themselves that things might not stay the same. But Sunday dinner happened anyway. Kevin was at the head of the table. He'd grilled chicken, which he did sometimes on Sundays, and he was in that particular good mood he got when basketball season was going well. He talked about Marcus's upcoming playoff bracket. He talked about the other boys on the team. He directed his comments mostly toward Marcus, occasionally toward me, and not at all toward Zoe, who sat across from Marcus and ate her chicken and her green beans. Green beans she hated. She'd hated them since she was 5. She ate them every time without saying a word because she'd learned that much about keeping the peace. I waited until there was a lull. Kevin had finished his story about the coach and was cutting into a second piece of chicken. I put my fork down. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Kevin looked up. "Sure. Why is Zoe grounded for a B- when Marcus failed 3 classes?" The table went still. Not dramatically still. No one gasped. Just the specific quiet that falls over a room when something true and inconvenient enters it. Kevin stopped chewing. "Those are different situations," he said. "How?" I asked. He looked at Marcus briefly, then back at me. "Marcus has a lot of pressure this semester. Basketball, the playoffs. What pressure is Zoe carrying?" I said, keeping my voice level. "When her own stepfather treats her like a criminal for not being perfect." Kevin's face went red. The specific red that means someone is angry but hasn't decided yet whether to direct it outward or compress it. "Don't start this in front of the kids. The kids are already in the middle of it," I said. "Zoe knows. She's known for years she's held to a different standard. Marcus knows it too, I think, even if he's never had to say it out loud." Marcus was looking at his plate. Zoe was looking at me. There was something in her face I hadn't seen in a long time. Not hope, exactly, but the thing just below hope. The thing that comes before you let yourself hope. Kevin pushed back from the table. He stood up. He said, "I'm not doing this right now." And he walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs, and the bedroom door closed hard enough that the picture frame in the hallway, a photo of Zoe at age 5, missing her 2 front teeth, rattled against the wall. I stayed at the table. I told the kids to finish eating. Zoe did. Marcus pushed food around his plate for a while and then asked if he could be excused, and I said yes. I cleaned up alone. I scraped Kevin's half-eaten dinner into the trash. I stood at the sink and I thought about 6 years of watching my daughter calibrate herself to a man who was never fully going to claim her, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter and more final than anger. Kevin came downstairs an hour later. He was carrying pink roses, grocery store roses, still in the plastic sleeve, the kind with the UPC sticker on the cellophane. He held them out in front of him like a shield. "Let's just start fresh," he said. I looked at the roses for a moment. They were actually pretty, in a gas station sort of way. Pink, slightly wilted at the edges, someone's idea of an apology. Then I went to my home office. I came back with my 3 pages and I set them on the counter next to the roses. "I've been keeping track," I said. 4 years of documentation, specific dates, specific incidents, pages. I turned the pages toward him. October 15th, you grounded Zoe for an 87 on a quiz. The same week, Marcus turned in a history project 3 weeks late and you told him, and I'm quoting, "At least you finished it." September 23rd, Zoe couldn't attend her best friend's birthday party because one homework assignment was technically overdue by 12 hours. That same day, Marcus went to the mall with 3 separate missing assignments and you gave him $20 for lunch. Kevin's face went from red to a color I'd never actually seen on him before. Something tight and controlled and deeply uncomfortable. He reached for the pages. I pulled them back. Then I opened my laptop. I'd had it on the kitchen table. I turned the screen toward him. 6 months of bank statements, all tabbed, color-coded. Every household expense highlighted in yellow. Mortgage, property taxes, utilities, groceries, car insurance for both vehicles, health insurance for all 4 of us, school supplies and registration fees for both kids, home maintenance, the new water heater in August, his contributions in blue, his car payment, which ran through our joint account before he transferred money in to cover it, his personal spending, gas, his gym membership. The screen was almost entirely yellow. I'm covering 90% of everything that keeps this family running, I said. 90%. While you criticize my daughter for not being perfect and take your son for ice cream after he fails 3 classes. Kevin set the roses down on the counter. He set them down harder than he needed to. You're keeping score, he said. You know how sick that is? You're sitting here with spreadsheets and notes like some kind of, you're turning our marriage into a case file. I made notes because I needed to understand what I was seeing, I said. And what I'm seeing is that you have been holding my daughter to a standard for 6 years that you have never once applied to your son. Don't make this about the kids. It is about the kids, I said. It started with the kids. You ambushed me at dinner, he said, in front of them, on purpose. I asked a question, I said. You're the one who couldn't answer it. He called me controlling. He said I was making him feel small. He said this wasn't what he signed up for, which was a thing he said sometimes when he was cornered, as if there was a version of this marriage where I was a different woman and everything was easier, and he had been wrongfully redirected to this harder version of things. The only person who made you look small tonight, I said, was you. When you sat at that table with both of your children watching and you could not give one honest reason why what you're doing is fair. He was quiet for a moment. He had his jaw set and his arms crossed, and he was doing that thing where the muscle in his cheek jumps because he's grinding his teeth. Then he said the thing that changed the temperature in the room entirely. I know about the business card in your purse, he said. I went still. Wayne Fisher, he said slowly, watching my face. Family law attorney. You want to tell me what you're really planning? I need to explain the business card. 3 weeks earlier, I'd had lunch with my college roommate, Diane. Diane went through a divorce 2 years ago that was mediated well, and she'd mentioned Fisher's name to me. Not because she thought I was planning anything, but because we'd been talking about what the bank statements actually showed. And she said, with the kind of directness only old friends use, you should at least know your options. Fisher had handled her post-divorce asset restructuring. She gave me the card. I put it in my purse and I left it there. The way you leave a card you're not ready to use but aren't ready to throw away either. I hadn't told Kevin any of this. I hadn't told anyone except Diane. The card was in an inner zipper pocket of my bag. He would have had to go looking for it. Standing in my kitchen that night, I understood 2 things simultaneously. The first was that Kevin had gone through my purse. The second was that he had been watching me with more calculation than I'd realized, waiting for leverage, waiting for a moment to use it. I've been talking to someone too, he said, his voice dropping the way people's voices drop when they want you to feel how serious they are. So if you want to play it that way, we can play it that way. I looked at my husband. I looked at this man I'd shared a house and a dinner table with for 6 years, and something that had been complicated and painful and grief adjacent became very, very simple. You went through my purse, I said. He didn't deny it. You found a business card from someone you didn't recognize, and you researched it, and you've been holding it for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment to threaten me with it. He said, I wouldn't call it a threat. What would you call it? I said. He didn't answer. You didn't ask me about it, I said. You didn't say, I found this. It scared me. I'm worried about us. You saved it. You planned to deploy it. I paused. That tells me everything I need to know about what you think this marriage is. Kevin started talking about counseling. He started talking about how we'd hit a wall and walls were normal and every couple hit them and this was fixable if we just agreed to take it down a degree and talk to someone together. He talked fast the way people talk when they're trying to move past the thing they just did before you have too much time to think about it. I let him talk. Then I said, the house is in my name, Kevin. He stopped. Just mine. The mortgage is in my name. The deed is in my name. When we married, we had a conversation about keeping the asset structure as it was, and you agreed to it. Do you remember that conversation? He did. I could see that he did. That means that in any legal proceeding, I said quietly, the house is not a marital asset. I had a brief phone call with Wayne Fisher 2 weeks ago, not to plan anything, just to understand where I stood, and that's one of the things he told me. Kevin sat down at the kitchen table. He sat down like the air had gone out of him. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. Standing there looking at him, this man I had built a life with, this man Zoe had tried for years to win over, this man who grilled chicken on Sundays and drove his son to practice and was, in some real and functional ways, trying to be a good person. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying more than their share for so long that they've lost the memory of what it felt like to put it down. I think you need to go stay somewhere else for a while, I said, while we figure out what comes comes next. He looked up at me. You're kicking me out. I'm asking you to give us space, I said. There's a difference. He sat there for another minute. Then he got up and went upstairs. He went to his brother Todd's house that night. He packed a bag, said something to Marcus that I didn't hear, and left without speaking to Zoe at all. I heard his truck pull out of the driveway at 11:15. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea I'd stopped drinking, and I listened to the engine fade, and then I just sat there in the quiet for a long time. Zoe knocked on the kitchen doorframe around 11:30. She was in her pajamas. She asked if Kevin was coming back. I told her I didn't know yet. She sat down at the table across from me, and we were quiet together for a minute, and then she said, I heard what you said, at dinner, and after. I looked at her. You didn't have to do that, she said, and then, after a pause, but I'm glad you did. I had to hold very still for a moment after that. The weeks that followed were, to put it plainly, chaotic. Kevin called twice a day at first, alternating between versions of himself. The conciliatory Kevin who wanted to talk, the wounded Kevin who felt ambushed and maligned, the strategic Kevin who mentioned his lawyer in passing the way you mention a card you have in your hand without laying it down yet. His mother called me, Linda, who I had always genuinely liked, who brought food at holidays and remembered Zoe's birthday reliably, and who was, in this moment, working very hard to be neutral, while also clearly being on her son's side. She asked if we could talk. I said yes. She said Kevin was devastated. I said I understood that. She said she hoped we could find a way through. I said I hoped so too. What I didn't say, but what sat between us on the phone like an undetonated thing, was that hoping and doing are two different actions, and only one of them had been happening in my house for the last 6 years. Diane was the first person I told the full story to. She came over on a Wednesday night with wine and stayed until 2 in the morning and asked questions in the precise, specific way she always has. Not to pry, but because she's the kind of person who believes that if you understand the exact shape of a problem, you can actually address it as opposed to just surviving it. She pointed out something I hadn't fully articulated to myself. She said, the documentation wasn't paranoia. It was your nervous system telling you what your brain wasn't ready to say yet. I'd thought about that a lot since then. My neighbor Patrice had seen Kevin loading his bag into his truck. She came over the next morning with coffee and didn't ask questions, just sat with me in the backyard for 45 minutes while Zoe was at school. She had been through something similar a decade ago. Different details, same architecture, and she said something I wrote down afterward. The hardest part isn't when it ends. The hardest part is the middle year, when you know how it ends, but you're still living the earlier part. She was right about that too. I filed the petition in early December. Wayne Fisher was exactly as straightforward as Diane had said he would be. He explained the asset situation clearly and without drama. Because the house was in my name alone, and because we had a documented prenuptial adjacent asset agreement, Kevin had no claim on the property. He was entitled to consideration of marital contributions, which his lawyer would no doubt pursue, but the baseline was clean in my favor. The joint account, modest, primarily used for shared expenses, would be divided. Kevin had his truck and his personal accounts and his income. Marcus was not my child legally, and that question, which I had thought would feel colder than it did, was actually one of the few parts of this that resolved cleanly. He was Kevin's son. He would go with Kevin. The complexity there was not legal but human. I had lived with this kid for 5 years. I had made his lunches. I had helped him with homework. I had watched him grow. And I had also watched for 5 years my own daughter bend herself into whatever shape might finally make her stepfather treat her like she was worth the same effort. I grieved Marcus in a specific way, not as a loss of relationship because we'd never had quite the right one, but as a loss of the possibility of it. Zoe grieved him too, I think. She never said so directly. But there was a week in January where she seemed quieter than usual, and I found a photo on her desk of the 4 of us from a beach trip in 2021, the kids with their arms around each other, squinting into the sun. It was still face down on her desk 2 weeks later. I left it alone. Kevin's final move, the one I think he'd been building towards since the kitchen that night, was to contest the asset agreement on the basis that the verbal understanding we'd had about finances wasn't legally binding. His lawyer filed a motion in January. Fisher responded within 2 weeks, with documentary evidence of the original mortgage application, the deed, the account histories, and an email Kevin had sent me in 2020 that said explicitly, I know the house is yours and I'll always respect that. The motion was withdrawn before February. I want to tell you where things are now. It's April. Zoe is still 12. She got a 94 on her next English exam, not because she was trying to prove anything, but because the grounding is over and she can breathe again, and she has always done her best work when she isn't afraid. She asked me recently on a Saturday morning while we were making pancakes whether I was sad about it, about Kevin. She asked it in that careful, specific way she has, not probing, not worried, just actually wanting to know the honest answer. I thought about it. Some, I said, not because I want it to be different than it is, but because there was a version of it that could have been something good, and it wasn't. She nodded. She flipped a pancake. She said, I think I used to try really hard with him. I know, I said. I don't think it was about me, she said. I don't think he knew how. She's 12. She shouldn't have had to figure that out. She figured it out anyway, and she figured it out with more grace than it deserved. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the bank statements, not the deed, not the evenings in my home office building a record of what was actually happening in my own house. Those were all just the mechanics. The thing underneath all of it, the reason I put my fork down at a Sunday dinner and asked a simple question I already knew the answer to. Was a 12-year-old girl eating green beans she hated because she had learned to make herself smaller and quieter and easier to overlook in her own home? That was the thing I couldn't leave alone. Kevin called last week. He wanted to talk about a summer schedule for keeping in touch with Zoe, which surprised me. They weren't legally bound in any way, and I hadn't expected him to ask. I told him Zoe would need to make that choice herself, and I would support whatever she decided. She decided she'd be open to it. One conversation, no commitment, her terms. She told me that later, matter of fact, while she was doing her homework at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where Kevin had held her report card like evidence at a trial. She had her notes spread out in front of her, 3 different colors of highlighter, completely at ease. Does that seem okay to you? She asked. That I might talk to him? Seems like exactly the right call, I said. She nodded and went back to her work. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched her for a moment. The afternoon light was coming in at a low angle and catching the edge of her notebook, and she was writing something in the margin, probably a note to herself, probably something organized and purposeful and already one step ahead. She has never needed someone to tell her she was worth the effort. She's always known. I just needed, finally, to act like I knew it too.